Hello, everybody. I hope you had a great first week, and I want to welcome you to week 2 in Research and Media Communications. So, again, let's jump right in. So, for this week, the first thing that we're going to be focusing on is a review of grammar fundamentals. And why is this important? Well, you're going to be doing a lot of writing, not just in this research class, but throughout your time here at Full Sail and in the MCBS program, but also out in the professional world, and your writing is a reflection of who you are. It's usually the first thing that people see. So this is a review of some of the elements that are required for professional writing and writing for research. Again, we're going to be visiting Linda. I think we all remember how to get there. You're going to watch your assets, and then you can either press your face up here. Hello, there I am. Ed Resources, which takes you to the Linda. Or remember, you go through the library or connect the library, go down to Linda and go through there. And if not, you will end up being asked to pay for something that you already have access to. So don't do that. So after you've completed your grammar fundamentals, workshop, you will do a small written review of what you've learned about grammar, any changes that you've noticed to our language, the vernacular of our society. EVOO, I'm sure you guys have heard that Rachel Ray phrase. It actually got added to the dictionary for extra virgin olive oil. It was used so much by so many people, they actually added it to the dictionary, so it's an acceptable term at this point. So you can think about things that have, evolved that way in our written language and the way we communicate. You can just imagine what's happened with, us having small computers in our hands now, and a lot of us just talk now via text, not necessarily face to face or in huge like written words. Yes, we do still email and we still write papers, all those things occur, but on a day-to-day communication basis, think of the words that have been replaced for other words when you're just texting. And think about how that's changed communication. So this is going to be Tuesday, and that is pretty self-explanatory. I don't think you'll have any problems with that. It's the Linda, and then you're just going to talk about the things that I mentioned. Okay, now we're getting to the meat of this research class, and I want to talk to you right now about qualitative and quantitative methods. Now, these are two different types of methods for doing research. There's qualitative and quantitative data, there's qualitative and quantitative research, and both of these mean different things about how you gather data or how you go about doing research. Always think to yourself, and this is my little helpful tool, when you're thinking qualitative, think about quality. And when you're thinking about quantitative, think about the numbers, the quantity. So we have quality and quantity. So quantity reminds you of numbers, statistics, numerical. Qualitative reminds you of like focus groups and surveys and one-on-one conversations. And we're going to dive into that after we watch this short video.
Have you ever been interviewed? Have you ever filled out a survey? If you've done both, then you've participated in qualitative and quantitative research. Come on, pack up your bags and get on the bus, because we're about to journey through qualitative and quantitative research. Ba-da-da-da! Welcome to another Journey with Chris, where we will obtain new levels of knowledge and awesomeness. Hello, scholars. Today we're going to journey through the basics of qualitative and quantitative research. On our journey, we're going to compare the characteristics of both kinds of research, including their purpose, research questions, hypothesis, data analysis, and final reports. Let's talk about the purpose of both types of research. The purpose of qualitative research is to explore the meaning of people's experiences, the meaning of people's cultures, the meaning of how people view a particular issue or case, known as a case study. But the purpose of quantitative research is to examine the relationship between variables. Let's define a variable. A variable is a characteristic. We'll talk more about this in just a second. But for this class, we're going to learn about three kinds of variables: independent, dependent, and extraneous. Independent variables are variables or characteristics that are manipulated by the researcher. Dependent variables are characteristics that are impacted by that manipulation of the independent variable. Extraneous variables are variables that are extraneous to what the researcher is really trying to focus on, and they're usually demographic information such as age, sex, race, ethnicity, things like that. So let's say a researcher makes a poster that says, hey, you probably got some of you or other people's pee or poop on your hands, so wash your hands. The researcher puts up that poster in one bathroom and doesn't put it in another bathroom. Then the researcher watches to see if more people wash their hands after peeing or pooping who were exposed to the poster compared to those who were not exposed to the poster. It turns out that more people washed their hands who went to the bathroom where the poster was. The independent variable in this study is the poster on the wall. It was manipulated by the researcher. The dependent variable was the characteristic of hand washing. It was the effect of there being or not being a poster in the bathroom. Some extraneous variables are the people in the bathroom's age, sex, race, ethnicity, and so on. The point of the study was to examine the relationship between these variables. More hand washing, the dependent variable, took place in the bathroom that had the poster, which was the independent variable. Let's talk about research questions. Since qualitative research is exploratory in nature, qualitative research questions usually start with the words what or how, since these words imply discovery or exploration. Excuse me. For example, a qualitative research question could be, what are college students' experience in trying to eat healthy on campus? Or, how do college students celebrate the subcultural holiday of 420? Because qualitative research is exploratory, it typically does not have a hypothesis, which is a prediction. In a nutshell, qualitative research tries to explore, not predict, participants' views. Similar to qualitative research, quantitative research questions can start with the words what or how, but they might also include the word does in the beginning of the question. In descriptive quantitative research, research questions ask how much, how often, what's the relationship between variables, what's the difference between the variables. For example, what percent of male college students wash their hands after using campus bathrooms, or what is the relationship between college student gender and hand washing practices after using campus bathrooms. In experimental research questions, this is where they might start with the word does, such as, does hand washing increase when a poster is placed in a campus bathroom? Compared to qualitative research, quantitative research does have hypotheses or predictions about what will happen in the study. Typically, in qualitative research, researchers collect more than one type of data in order to get a better, more holistic picture of what's going on in the field. The data used in qualitative research is almost always in what people say or their words. This data usually comes from interviews, documents like newspapers or journals, etc., observations, and audio-visual materials like videos or audio recordings. Researchers usually obtain multiple types of these kinds of data in order to answer a research question. All of this data comes from the field, which means the natural settings where participants are. In qualitative research, researchers go into the field and spend a lot of time there interviewing and observing the participants and their environments. It's also important to note that surveys or questionnaires are also known as instruments. Well, in qualitative research, there are no instruments, no surveys. In qualitative research, the researcher is the instrument. What this means is that the researcher acts as an instrument. The researcher is kind of like a living survey. They ask all the questions and make observations instead of relying on surveys to gather data. It's also important to note that a hallmark of qualitative research is its emergent design. This means that the way in which the study is conducted can change during the study. During qualitative research, it may become apparent that other forms of data from other groups of people should be included into the study. For instance, let's say that a researcher is studying college students' experience trying to eat healthy on campus. Originally, the researcher has planned to just interview a bunch of students, but let's say that during the interviews, the students keep talking about the ice cream area of the cafeteria and student union. How there's over 400 kinds of ice cream and you have to walk around the ice cream to get to the apples and on about the ice cream bar. Well, the researcher hears enough students talk about this crazy ice cream bar that the researcher decides that observational data should be included in the study. She needs to see the ice cream bar for herself and see how it overshadows the apple bin. She needs to see why everyone's talking about this crazy ice cream bar. So the research design emerges and different kinds of data might be collected as the study goes on. The data for quantitative research is in the form of numbers. These numbers usually come from what people check off on instruments, which are surveys or questionnaires, or observational checklists and so on. So qualitative research looks at words, quantitative research looks at numbers. Let's talk about analysis. In qualitative research, analysis is all about creating themes. Researchers read their interviews, look at documents, observations, and audiovisual materials, and then they organize all of that data, all of those words, into themes. This can take a considerable amount of time. There are often pages and pages of interview transcripts to read. For example, let's say a researcher interviewed students about their experience eating healthy on campus. From the interview, there were over 80 pages of interview text to read. From those pages, the researcher was able to group the data or analyze the data, group it into three major themes, which were students believed that there was a lack of healthy options on campus, the students believed the healthy options were too expensive, and they felt that unhealthy options were just too tempting. It's important to note here that qualitative research is inductive in nature. That means that the research questions, the data collection, the analysis, and all that stuff is not based off of a theory or preconceived notions that the researcher has. The researcher lets the data speak for itself and form itself into themes without the bias of an existing theory or existing ways of thinking about things already. On the other hand, in quantitative research, analysis involves the use of statistics to crunch numbers and figure out what those numbers mean in terms of answering a research question. Qualitative research looks at themes, research and analysis crunches numbers, statistics. Quantitative research is also usually deductive. It's based from existing theories and information that's already out there to help form research questions and how data is collected and how it's analyzed. Let's talk about the final report. In qualitative research, the final report is usually narrative in nature. The authors will sometimes write in the first person. It's more interpretive, and it contains a lot of writing, and it has direct quotes from participants. The final reports for quantitative research are more rigid in form, and it's more in the form of a statistical report. In conclusion, there are noteworthy differences between qualitative and quantitative research in terms of their purpose, research questions, data analysis, and so on. And this video is just an intro to each style of research. We're going to go into way more depth as the semester continues with each form of research. So thanks for a great journey, and I'll see you in class.
Okay, so those are the differences between qualitative and quantitative research and methods. And I know that can be kind of hard to keep it in your head, so try to remember that quality and quantity differentiation between the two words. I do want to point out that when he was talking about using survey instruments such as surveys to gather data, be it qualitative or quantitative, you actually can incorporate data gathering of a qualitative nature in a survey just by, think of this, like, your quantitative questions are going to be like, are you male or female? Yes or no. That's pretty straightforward. What is your age group, and giving the sample age groups that they fall in between there, and you'll have a percentage of people that choose those boxes. But if you were to say, did you see this particular movie? Yes, no. And then your next question was, in this scene where this happened, what did you think was the issue that was portrayed by the actors? Okay, so now they're giving opinion within that survey. They're actually giving their own ideas to the question. So you can combine that. That's called mixed methods. And usually most things are of a mixed method variety. You're very rarely going to have a complete qualitative or a complete quantitative study. At some point, there will be some mixing of these methods. Okay, so that's great. So what are we going to do with that? Well, one of the things that we have to learn, especially in this age of our digital age, we have to learn to visualize the data that we gather from these studies. Why? Well, think about it. Think about when you go on Facebook. I mean, do you usually stop and read the 5-paragraph long things, or the visual videos that catch your attention quickly, or the infographic that catches your attention quickly? It's usually those visual stimuli, things that grab your brain and make you think about, oh, yeah, I do recognize this, that grab people's attention and help them read it. And that's actually a whole new career now out in the world of design and research. They've combined. If you think about infographic designers, people that do educational explainers, it's that combination of information and visual that has created a whole entire new career path. So why visualize? Let's look at that.
In the arrangement of a visualization, every single pixel should testify directly to content. As Johnny Ive, the great Apple designer, said, we spend most of our time getting design out of the way. It's got to get out of the way because it's about the relationship of the viewer and how they reason about the content. Style and aesthetics cannot rescue failed content. If the words aren't truthful, the finest optically letter-space typography won't turn lies into truths. There are enormously beautiful visualizations, but it's as a byproduct of the truth and the goodness of the information. The big steps in showing information began all with cartography about 6,000 years ago when the first map was scratched into a piece of stone. And that has wound up now with the most widely seen visualization in the world, which is Google Maps, where people are using a visualization to actually do something. The next big step was the development of real science. Galileo got his telescope going. He saw things that had never been seen before. He made beautiful drawings of sunspots, and he watched the sun for about 40 days, and he did engravings of the sunspots, so he visualized what he saw. And so the history of visualizing data is very substantially a history of science.
Data visualization is not just some airy-fairy creative process, but it's actually a very linear process of decision-making that you can do based on some few basic principles. 3 things should inform your design always. 1 is you as the designer, what you have to say and what you want to communicate. 2 is the reader. That reader is not you, and they're going to come with their own context and their own biases and their own assumptions, and you need to account for that. And 3rd is the data itself and what that has to say and how that informs the truth. There's a lot of subconscious brain activity happening. We evolved for it to happen that way. We evolved to see things and make snap decisions. Are all those lines in the grass just dried grass, or is that a tiger that's coming to eat me? We have to be able to recognize those patterns right away and make snap decisions on them in order to survive. And that can be an advantage as a designer. You can communicate a lot of information very quickly because we all have brains that are designed to recognize patterns this way. But also, there's the emotional impact. We react to design and to art and to the aesthetics of a piece just as much as we react to the information contained in it. And so if you want to change someone's mind, if you want to change someone's behavior, sometimes presenting the information in a visual format is the fastest way to get them to engage with that information.
Truth is one of those ambiguous things that you can't really define and probably changes and evolves the more understanding you have. Data itself is a result of research, so I would say that data is just a clue to the end truth. I think a successful infographic tells a story. It communicates hopefully accurate and sometimes complicated data in a way that many people can understand. I think the first step usually is always dig really deeply into the data ourselves and find each key point and create a hierarchy and a narrative out of that story. When you start to merge different pieces of information and when you start to learn really what it's all saying, the narrative is clear. The one key fact that everything can revolve around is the hero of the piece. There's one single piece of data or insight that people respond to and kind of encapsulate the whole vision, and then invite people in to see the nuances and all the rest of the story around it. When you look at a piece, it's successful when it translates data from something that's complicated to something simple. When it communicates a message that otherwise would have taken somebody hours to digest and find in an instant.
My deepest interest lies at the boundary between data and culture. Data are measurements of something. In very many cases, those somethings that we're talking about are human systems. We're dealing with data systems that are larger than anything that humans have ever built or experienced before. And these really large systems, things happen within them that are emergent. For example, Gate Change combines shot footage from airports for pretty much every airport in the world, and then air travel data as well. So the central idea was to show people that every time that you're in an airport, you are standing on the surface of a system that is almost too complex to comprehend. At any given time, there are more than 1 million people in the air. And so there's another purpose of data visualization. There's revelation, which is show us something that we've never seen before. This is, for me, much more exciting. Anybody can visualize data in Excel and see some bar charts. For me, it's about showing them something in this kind of loose narrative frame that they can interpret. So we show them some pieces of the picture, and the idea is that they can sort of stand back from that and watch it pass for a little bit and come out of it with some deeper understanding. Part of it is leaving it open to interpretation, but part of it is also not really knowing. I don't have some masterful understanding of this system that you don't. I have some ideas about how these systems might be changing and how they might be growing and how they might be important to our culture and society. And I want to share some of those ideas with you, and maybe you can put together something that I wouldn't have been able to put together.
I think in general audiences are a lot smarter than a lot of people think. So it's not know your audience, it's respect your audience and really know your content. That's what you should be knowing and reasoning about. Look after truth and goodness, and beauty will look after herself. You want to see to learn something, not to confirm something. We usually see to confirm things. It's very economizing for the brain. How can we see not to confirm, but to see to learn?
Okay, so like I said, data visualization has become huge, and it's become its own career path within the merge of design and research. You will play with this a lot more in your graphics class, and today I'm even giving you the focal point of what your infographic is going to be on. You're going to give a definition of qualitative and quantitative data and research methods by creating your own infographic. And I want to show you a couple of examples. So here's an example of it. See, it can be very simple. They're not complicated. They're not complicated definitions, but when you have to think about boiling them down into very succinct points and then visualizing that in a way that design reflects, easy access for the viewer. Think back to your aesthetics class for this. It actually, something so simple can feel a lot more complicated. And there is an example on your FSO dashboard, but here's yet another example of, taking this information and boiling it down to very small points and then visualizing it for your viewer. And we'll look at this one as well. And so here they're comparing the research methods. And you can choose to compare the research methods, or I'll even accept if you want to do the definition of each and go with that theme. Either one is fine with me. But the idea is for you to play around with, taking a large amount of information and bringing it down to a very small amount and then visualizing it so it's enjoyable for your viewer. Now, how are you going to do this? We have this is a tool. Nope, that's Coggle. We want to go to easily. This is Coggle, and this is a template making infographic designer, and I find it very easy to use, but I want to start by showing you just a few tips and tricks. Do you have to use easily? If you're amazing at Illustrator and you want to go go with it in there, feel free. You just have to be able to turn in a PDF for this. And I believe it still allows you to, or it may allow you to choose a low resolution JPEG. That's fine too, just so long as you have something downloaded that you can upload to FSO. Screenshots are not great because it's hard to get the whole infographic in there. So I like this site because without having to pay for it, of course they have paid versions, but without having to pay for it, it does allow you to download and have this to post onto FSO. So just a couple things. So here I'm going to clear this board. And one thing I think you'll like is that it has already done templates. So, you don't have to start completely from scratch. If you're uncomfortable, you can go through here and you can, like, here's a good one. Oops, you have to pull it down. I know I always click it. You have to pull it down. Everything's pulled down. That's okay though. It's a small learning curve. And here's a good example of a versus. Now, obviously, you're going to need to change any sort of icon or photo here that doesn't match what you're doing. And it shouldn't look exactly like this, but it does give you a good foundation for starting. Another nice thing is if you have pictures, try to make sure that they're copyright free, but you can also upload images and you can bring them into here as well. So that's another tool. So let's say we're going to choose this one and it comes time to, we're going to download it. It's this low quality one. I'm almost positive. You can try and see if the PDF will let you do it without buying, but I'm pretty sure now they're only allowing for the low quality. It's okay. At this point, we're not expecting amazing design. It's great if you are talented in that area, and I love looking at those. But if you're not, feel free to use a template. There's also PictoChart. I'm not sure how they let you download. I've had issues in the past, and that's why I finally ended up working with easily.com. But you can play around with other platforms out there and see if one works better for you. Just make sure the end result is something that you can post to FSO. And I also wanted to show you something. I know this is my nerd brain coming out here, but if you remember how I showed you the resources, and one of those resources, okay, we can do this, is Safari Books. And so in Safari Books, that's it's a large platform that holds texts for students at Full Sail. And so, a lot of classrooms do have textbooks. And this is one of the places where we house ours. Now I'm going to try to find, I'll be able to give you the name. I think I put it under RMC. Okay, so here are a couple of infographic books. So here's The Power of Infographics, Using Pictures to Communicate. But this one's really nice. It's called Cool Infographics. And if you get a chance, I would open it up, and it has a lot of examples of different infographics, how they use data to tell a story, why infographics work. And it's just a cool place to go look if you have further interest in this topic. I would check it out. This one's called Cool Infographics. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward for this particular assignment. You're going to define qualitative and quantitative data, make sure that you review the assets up here, and you are posting your completed infographic down here, or down here where completion is. All right. Now this is a fun topic. So as we're about to see, reporting and research ethics has become a huge hot topic right now. Probably, I don't want to say more so than it ever has been, but it's definitely in the spotlight more than it has been in a long time. And there are a lot of different ideas about what is ethical in journalism and who is a journalist, and what your responsibilities are as a journalist or a communications student. Now, with the times being that everybody has access to a camera and everybody has access to video footage and an audience, an instant audience. You guys know viral videos and how very quickly they take hold, and so it kind of puts normal people in the position to be citizen journalists, which, then they have to start thinking about the ethical rules that are applied to the journalism field. All right, so let's listen a little bit about what that means.
Journalism is the gathering, reporting, the dissemination of news and information in the public interest. And it covers almost everything. Now, it used to be that we could always tell who a journalist was, because there are traditional views about who is a journalist. And journalists have been identified as being people either who are working for a media organisation, working in formally in a job of a journalist, or someone who's been trained specifically and gone through a college education in journalism, so they've got some sort of qualification. Or journalists have been identified as people who are members of a professional association or a journalist union. And so these have been the ways in which we've been able to identify journalists in the past. That's not so easy these days. Today, thanks to the internet, we've got much more sort of participation in the work of journalism and in journalism itself by people who are not falling into these traditional categories. But it's important to say that although the broad spectrum of who is working in journalism, and it may involve people who do blogging and other things, although you might say the door is open to far more people being engaged in journalism, that does not dilute the importance of standards and quality in the work that's being done. Many more people today may not be journalists, but they do commit acts of journalism. And it seems to us that we have to bring them into the conversation. We have to make them part of our discussion about the future of journalism. And we have to ask ourselves whether or not these people also deserve the same protections that are available to traditional journalists and people who have hitherto been regarded as professional journalists themselves.
And what a great thing to think about. I mean, how often do you wonder, are the people that, are out there putting out footage in situations that may be, volatile, whose view are they showing in these times? And if they are not adhering to basic journalism principles, and these things are the types of information that are going around the world, disseminating this information, should they be thinking and should they have some idea about what the ethics of journalism are? So let's talk about that. We're going to talk about the difference between free expression in journalism. We're going to make it big.
Free expression is such an important part of democracy, you can't underscore it enough. And free expression is the capacity of everyone to open up their computer or to take their telephone and to key in and to sort of blog and to say whatever they want. And providing they act within the bounds of decency and the law, they can say what they want. But they don't have to tell the truth. And they don't actually, have to tolerate other people. They can be offensive if they want to. They don't even have to say who they are. They can pretend to be somebody else. I mean, free expression is about giving people the freedom to say whatever they want without any undue restrictions. And they certainly don't have to be accountable. They don't have to say sorry when they make mistakes and so on and so forth. That's free expression. It's great and it's liberating and it's an important part of democracy, but it's not journalism. Journalism is quite distinct, because journalism is not free expression in that sense. It's press freedom. It's the freedom of journalists to express themselves, but within a framework of values. And that framework of values are the ethics of journalism. It's about self-restraint. Journalists don't allow themselves free expression. They constrain their expression inside the ethical framework of the work that they do. That's why, for journalists, they do have to correct their mistakes and say they're sorry when they make mistakes. They do have to respect facts. They're not allowed to indulge in malicious lies. They do have to show humanity to the audience and make sure that they're not promoting hate speech and so on. They do have to be impartial and recognize that there's more than one side to a story and so on. This attachment to values makes journalism quite distinct. So we shouldn't be confused about this. It's not quite free expression as we know it, But it is very much a part of our democracy and has to be protected.
So, what a great point here. So, think about all of the different social media platforms that we have out there and on the internet, all of the blogs. That are written by so many different types of people. And right now, it's really confusing for a lot of people who haven't done the digital literacy, Linda, or studied a little bit about what reliable sources are. It's hard to tell for a lot of people if what they're seeing is an actual journalistic news platform, or if it's just an opinion-based platform. There's a blurry line of distinction there now that hasn't, been there in the past. And so now people are going to need to be taught on how to identify whether or not platforms are reliable sources of information, or if they are just, made up expressions of free speech, which, of course is fine. But, if we were being ethical in total, they should label themselves as such and not as a journalistic platform. And, this is, like I said, again, this is a hot topic right now with information being everywhere. It's not easy for a lot of people to distinguish between these two types of sources. And, many platforms are trying to engage in this in this conversation. Facebook now will have how to spot reliable sources and standard sources of news on Facebook. Sometimes that information blob will pop up. And if you're interested, and hopefully people are, they can go in and read, how to spot the differences between the two types of information. And then Google has talked about in their search results about actually ranking in their SERP. What are reliable sources of information and what have been deemed as unreliable sources of information. So, this conversation is going to be ongoing. There are no easy answers right now, but it is up to us to be detectives to, find out more about any information, that we are spreading, especially as the professional in the communications field. How often is just your own private self have you clicked something on Facebook because you're like, yeah, and, suddenly it goes out there. I'm guilty of that too. But when I'm talking about it being my work and my reflection of me as a professional, well, there's a whole nother set of standards that go along with that as well.
There are about 400 codes of conduct around the world, covering all aspects of journalism. Some of them are very short, some of them are very long. But actually all of them are really focused on 5 key values for journalism. And the first of them is accuracy. I won't say truth because truth is a very long word. It actually gets us into a discussion about really what is true and what is not true. But accuracy is very important. So therefore the first principle is no deceptive handling of the facts. We work in facts, so fact-based information. Secondly, there's the principle of independence. The work that you do is your own work, but it's not on behalf of anyone else. You're not there to be a spokesman for the government. You're not there to be a representative of a particular business group or a special interest group. You have transparency in what you do so that when you are speaking and dealing with your audience and producing material, you're acting independently as an independent professional. Thirdly, there is the principle of impartiality. That is to say, you recognize that there's more than one side of a story. And very often there's more than 2 sides of a story. And as a journalist, you're responsible for looking and thinking about what are the other sides of this story. Here is one story that's being told, but what are the other opinions that I need to bring in to make the story whole? And then fourthly, there's the question of humanity. As a journalist, you're expected to show humanity. And what I mean by that is you're expected to be aware of the consequences of what you publish and what you broadcast. So you have to be aware that sometimes the words you use, the pictures you show can do damage. They can be harmful to people. It's not the job of a journalist to do undue harm. It's our job to protect people. And it's very important that when we are in reporting, we don't indulge in hate speech. We don't show obscene images. We don't show unnecessarily explicit images of violence and so on, because we are part of a humanitarian process, and that's what journalism should be. So humanity is a very important part of it. And fifthly is the issue of accountability. It's the one that's probably most difficult for journalists, and that's, we're not a humble group. We find it difficult to say sorry and to admit our mistakes, even though we can be lacerating in our criticism of others. But we have to do that. We have to engage with the audience, and we have to correct our mistakes, and we have to be prepared to provide remedies when we get it wrong and do damage. So these principles are pretty straightforward. Accuracy, independence, impartiality, humanity, and accountability. Those are the things that what make journalism different and distinct.
Okay, so what does that mean for us? Oh, this particular assignment, I'm actually turning you all into journalists for the idea of ethics in journalism. We're going to start by examining a couple of different reports where ethics have been brought into issue. The 60 Minutes Benghazi, Race to Broadcast, Blondes to Disappear, Social Media Influence on News Reports. Now, you read them all, but you only have to pick one of these to work with. And what you're going to do is you're going to create a mind map. And in that mind map, you're going to address these issues. So what ethical issues were raised by the article, your reaction to the ethical issues raised by the information in the article, and then remember how he talked about playing both sides, that you have to look at every side of a situation. So at this point, you're going to play devil's advocate on what opposing views could be expressed. What your opinion, at this point you get to put in your opinion about the issue and what caused you to form that opinion. Not just, I think it's bad because, but why? Flesh that out a little bit more. And how could using a balance in research and reporting tactics have made a difference in the outcome of what was being reported? Okay, and here you're going to make a mind map. Coggle is a tool that is used by created by Google. It's one of those fun lab tools that they have. It helps you create a mind map and I'll show you an example here. Okay, so here you go. And why are we doing this? Well, because it's just another way, especially when you're trying to formulate ideas for research or for writing. You remember how you create a storyboard before you do a video, or you write a script before you, jump into any sort of acting or recording, something to that effect. You always do an outline before you write. I hope you guys do an outline before you write. So this is just another way to tackle that. And a lot of people work really well with like breaking it down and putting it in a visual way. So here's an example of a Coggle that goes through each of those questions and just gives you a different way to kind of think about ethical issues and your reaction to ethical issues and things of that nature. So that is the Coggle, and that is going to be the task 1 up here. So task 2 is where you're becoming the reporter. So you're going to need to take a few minutes to think about where you think an issue has been portrayed unethically in the media. For instance, the Boston bombing, do not do it on the Boston bombing, now that I've given this as an example. When that was occurring in real time, a lot of platforms were just glued to this story, and Reddit in particular decided that they could solve this while it was going on. And so, the Reddit hive mind all just jumped in and they came up with a solution, and they knew who had done this horrible act, and they put the information out on this individual. They reported about it on there, and then lo and behold, news networks started taking information from Reddit about the situation that was going on in Boston, and they were reporting it as if it was news. And this was, not very unethical for any journalism platform to use a social media site like that as their sole source of information, and then to report with their viewer audience being so much larger than, the Reddit community. And of course, I'm sure you know the ending of this. It was not the person who had committed the atrocities. But how do you come back from that? Sure, the news networks can apologize, but there's plenty of people out there that will not have seen that apology. And this person's life can be altered, forever because of this reporting, which was not done with due diligence. They did not verify their sources in a reliable nature before they reported on this unethical situation. So you're going to think of a situation like that that you feel was reported unethically. Excuse me. And you are going to be the reporter. You're going to talk about when the story became public, who was responsible for reporting the story, what social media platforms were used to spread the story, what major points make the story unethical, how was it uncovered as unethical, and what actions were taken in response to the faulty information. Now, you're going to use a platform called Storify to create your article. And the reason why we're going to use Storify is because it will allow you to pull in examples from social media directly into your article. So let me find. I've made way too many examples here. Okay. And this is just a silly example, so we're going to look at this silliness that I have created as an example. So obviously this YouTube video has been taken down. That's unfortunate. So when you open up a new one, you're going to have a chance to put a headline in and then, a small statement to say what your article is going to be about. Now, here's the problem. A lot of the times I will have people that just pull in social media or news articles or videos, and they'll do it line after line after line. But you're having to answer those questions. So this is a story that you're going to be telling. And then you will be pulling in examples from social media or any of those places, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second, to help substantiate the information that you're sharing. So here I pulled in a video from the Golden Globes. Again, it looks like it's been taken down. And here I was able to pull in a tweet, and here I was able to pull in another tweet. So how do I write? So if you are ready to start writing, you can come up here and click and double click, and you're going to get a text box. And you can say, this is where I write. Okay, so done there, and that's where it is. Now let's say I want to find something out. Once you sign in over here, you have access to all of your social media platforms. But you also have access to just links on the internet. So you can put this in here and you can go out and search. So let's see, Golden Globes 2017, the winners and nominees. Let's say I want to talk about, the people that were so upset about not being winners. So I'm going to grab that clip. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to put it here, and we're going to have it. Here it is. Here's that article. So I want to put it in. I'm just going to drag it over, and there it is. It's right there in my story. And you can do that for Twitter. Whoops. I don't think there's such thing as a froggen. There we go. All right, so here's a bunch of different indie singer who sounds like this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it does show you that, how you can go and look at all the different things. Let's say I want an Instagram picture of Kermit the Frog. Oh, I haven't connected my Instagram. We're not going to go through trying to do that now, because I promise you I will not know what my password is at the moment. Frog. Okay, so here's some more stuff about Kermit. And, let's say here is where I want to do another written. I'm going to enter the text. Kermit was unethical because he didn't think Miss Piggy should win. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more in depth than that. This is just an example. But now let's say I want to pull this in as an example underneath there. And there you go. And it builds the article. And so you can see, here's one done. Here's a finished product. Now this person didn't use many different resources, so just take that in mind. They were doing a story on the college student Storify. This thing actually got 105 million views, which that's pretty crazy. But it was a story about a bus monitor who was being bullied. And so they're telling the story, they brought in this article. They're telling the story, they brought in an image. And again, it doesn't have to be from social media. You can go, this is from Business Insider, you can use that little link to bring in outside sources as well. But you see how they're telling the story, but they're using social media or images or video to back up their position. Okay, so that's a good example of what it should look like for your final project with that. And hopefully, you'll find it fairly easy to use. I always say if you can tackle Prezi, and I know you all have been exposed to Prezi, this is nothing. This is so easy. But here's a guided tour of Storify 2 if you get a little bit lost in there. So for this final submission for the week, you will have your coggle that's going to address these specific topics. And remember, you only have to choose one of these articles. You don't pick them all. And then down here, your Storify, which is your opinion of what was treated unethically, but you have to support it. Okay, it doesn't get to just be this is my opinion. You have to say what major points made it unethical, how was it uncovered is unethical. So it can't, even though it is your opinion, you still have to have some support from somewhere to show that others thought it was unethical as well. And then hopefully you're able to find, actions were taken in response to that faulty information being out there. Make sure that you look at the rubric as always and hit all the points. Check your spelling, have somebody check your spelling for you so that you don't get dinged for any improper spelling or improper grammar. And that wraps up the week. So I hope you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you again in week 3.